Namibia's new and first female president has made history against the United States, and it has Donald Trump on edge. He slammed the doors on Africans for years. The United States humiliated African citizens with endless visa delays, denials, and disrespect, all while enjoying VIP access to the continent with no visa required. Americans could fly into African countries like they own the skies. No questions, no queues, no shame. But that era is ending, and Namibia just made it official. Under President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, the message is clear. If Africans need a visa to enter America, then Americans need a visa to enter Africa. No exceptions, no hypocrisy. However, Trump hasn't taken the new policy seriously until now. This week, over 500 American nationals were ordered to leave Namibia immediately for violating the country's new visa regulations. They didn't apply, they didn't respect the law, and Namibia isn't here to babysit U.S. tourists. But here's the question: what exactly did these Americans do wrong? What violations pushed Namibia to take this unprecedented step? And will Namibia deport them if they did not leave on their own? Let's find out. It's official. Namibia has flipped the immigration policy. No longer will American citizens stroll into Namibia visa-free, while African travelers to the United States face humiliating rejections, months-long delays, and dehumanizing interviews. Starting April 1, 2025, Namibia has declared that if Africans need visas to enter the United States, then Americans will now need visas to enter Namibia. No more free passes, no more imperial courtesy. The announcement made by Namibia's bold new leadership under President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah marks a historic shift in African diplomacy. It's not a reaction, it's a statement. One that echoes across the continent that Africa will no longer bow to double standards. Previously, Namibia had been among the many African nations that allowed American travelers in without visa requirements, a diplomatic courtesy the U.S. never reciprocated. It was too arrogant to understand that Namibia was doing it as a favor, not because it wanted American tourists. Being more arrogant, America ensured Africans and Namibians were treated unfairly, so they would know they were less important. For decades, Namibian citizens were forced to endure layers of red tape just to visit America, while Americans could mine diamonds, run safari lodges, or conduct business in Namibia with barely a stamp on their passport. That double standard has now expired. The new Namibian policy introduces a visa-on-arrival system for U.S. citizens, requiring them to pay roughly $90 at entry points. But even more importantly, the government is conducting a sweeping crackdown on Americans already living in the country illegally or without proper documentation. As of April, over 500 American nationals have been identified and ordered to leave for violating visa procedures or overstaying their permitted time. And they are not just tourists. Many of these individuals were reportedly involved in Namibia's mining and extraction sectors, extracting uranium, diamonds, copper, and rare earth metals without valid work permits or proper immigration clearances. For years they operated under the radar. Now the radar is locked on. Immigration officials have already begun serving deportation notices. Law enforcement has been brought in to ensure the process is carried out in full compliance with Namibian law, but with no compromise on sovereignty. It's a new era of discipline, where even Westerners will no longer be shielded by their passports. That's because President Nandi-Ndaitwah made it crystal clear that this is not an act of hostility, it is an act of fairness. If our people need visas to go to Washington, then your people will need visas to come to Windhoek, she declared. It wasn't said in anger, it was said in dignity. And to make her vision even clearer, the president announced a complementary policy that will go down in history. Namibia will be making the country visa-free for all African nations. That's right. While Americans must now apply for permission, Africans are being welcomed freely, because Africa isn't the problem. Africa is the solution. This bold move is part of a broader Pan-African vision to promote unity, intra-African travel, and trade. It's about turning Africa from a fragmented continent of 54 checkpoints into a borderless home, where African passports matter, where no African is treated like an outsider in Africa. Globally, the response has been split. Pan-African activists and African citizens are applauding Namibia, calling it the long overdue start of reciprocity and resistance. But in Washington and in certain European capitals, diplomats are quietly panicking, because if Namibia can do this, who's next? As Namibia asserts its sovereignty, a bigger question looms: is this the beginning of Africa rewriting the rules of international respect? Will other African nations finally start demanding reciprocity from the West? Or will this act trigger backlash and economic threats from countries used to unchecked privilege? Either way, the message is loud and irreversible. Africa is no longer begging, Africa is building boundaries. And Namibia is leading the charge. But why did Namibia target the US first? Well, because enough was enough. For decades, the United States has treated African travelers like criminals in waiting. A Namibian entrepreneur applying for a US visa faces background checks, interrogations, proof of funds, and a near 50% chance of being rejected, not because of criminality, but because of nationality. Entire families have been denied access to the US for weddings, funerals, conferences, or even life-saving treatment, all while American tourists flew into Africa visa-free, as if colonial entitlement was still the global default. Namibia decided to make an example, and America was the perfect one. Why? Because no other country has benefited more from Africa's generosity while offering so little in return. America has operated diamond mines in Namibia. Its mining giants have extracted uranium for decades. Its corporations dominate tech, telecom, and agriculture partnerships. And its citizens, many of whom live in Namibia, without even a visa, blend into the wealthy enclaves of Windhoek or operate tourist businesses in Etosha, all while Namibians struggled just to secure an entry stamp into the United States Embassy in Pretoria. This imbalance wasn't just visible, it was insulting. When President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah stepped into power as Namibia's first female president, she made it clear Namibia would no longer be a playground for unequal diplomacy. Her administration reviewed all visa agreements, and what they discovered was shocking. American citizens had more access to Namibia than Namibians had to anywhere in the West. And yet those Americans weren't even complying with immigration rules. The 500 Americans ordered to leave Namibia weren't just tourists overstaying their visas. Many had entered without any visa at all, exploiting the old loophole of visa-free entry and the lax oversight from previous governments. Some were working illegally, others were involved in resource extraction, unlicensed business operations, or shady missionary activity, with no accountability to local law. And here's something shocking. When these individuals were asked to retroactively apply for proper work or residency visas, they were denied, not because Namibia was punishing them, but because they failed to qualify under Namibian immigration standards. That's when the president stepped in. She ordered immediate deportation proceedings, sending shockwaves across diplomatic channels. Yes, the same country, which is deporting people from its country, will now see its citizens being deported. Embassies scrambled, lobbyists panicked, U.S. officials asked for leniency, but Namibia refused to flinch. This wasn't about individuals anymore. It was about dignity. Namibia wasn't just targeting Americans to make a scene, it was calling out hypocrisy. The United States demands full compliance with its immigration laws, and deportations are standard procedure for undocumented immigrants. But when Namibia applies the same rules to Americans, suddenly it's seen as controversial. That double standard is exactly what Namibia is tearing down. And here's where it gets deeper. Unlike many African countries that fear Western backlash, Namibia stood firm. It didn't bow to diplomatic pressure. It didn't apologize. It reminded the world of something simple and unshakable. Every nation has the right to enforce its own borders, something the U.S. does daily with full aggression. And yet when Namibia did the same, the West called it hostile. That contradiction is the very heart of this policy change. Why is it acceptable for the United States to detain African students at airports, delay visas for months and fingerprint applicants in embassies, while Americans walk through African borders with no questions asked? Namibia had an answer. No more. And that answer didn't just shake the U.S., it shook Europe too. Germany, a former colonial ruler of Namibia, reportedly reached out to assess whether the visa policy could extend to EU citizens. They were told reciprocity is our foreign policy,